Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to introduce Erik, founder of ProdPerfect.
Hi, everyone. Wherever you're all calling in from, I hope you're safe and happy and healthy. I'm calling in today from sunny Long Beach, California, where we've got some great weather. I'm excited to talk to you all today about some of the strategic thinking that has informed ProdPerfect, which I'll talk a little bit about at the end, what my company does. But what I really want to do today is share a different way of thinking about quality assurance that's designed to, that is a mindset that's designed to inform a strategy which gets you much better results for your web application testing. So I want to start with a little bit of background on me. That was me, 10 years ago now. I was a factory consultant. So I ran around factories. I got to work with giant trucks like this and giant oil refineries like this, and I loved it. And my job in these factories was to make graphs go up and to the right? So we'd help them with production, with cost, with safety, environmental stuff, all sorts of things where they were having challenges with their current mode of operation. We'd help them make pretty dramatic improvements pretty quickly. And there were a lot of techniques and skills and engineering. I come from MIT. I got a mechanical engineering degree originally. And that was all very important. But ultimately, what we found was the thing that most mattered to being able to drive improvement, the big gate to being able to unlock that, was overcoming mindsets. And one of the mindsets that's very, very common in manufacturing and construction and all this heavy industry stuff is you have three things that you're paying attention to: speed, quality, and cost, and you get to pick two, right? And part of my job is to kind of roll my eyes at this and say, okay, great. And eventually get people through that mindset using data to understand and believe that they can actually improve all three of these at the same time. And this mindset is actually so deeply codified. You might just think that this is something that hangs around in people's brains, but it's so deeply codified that people write articles about this. It's called the iron triangle, right? Or the project management triangle. But this iron triangle is saying that there's this immutable law, right? Again, this is in project management and management theory articles. It's made it to Harvard Business School's journal, is that you have this choice fundamentally that you have to make between speed, cost, and quality. And while this is not fundamentally wrong, you can make those trade-off choices. What's always implied and what's always reinforced for our clients is that you only get to choose between speed, cost, and quality. You only get these trade-offs. And it's really frustrating running against that because it was just in our way of making improvement all the time. A big part of my job was to just nuke this, right? And just break people out of that way of thinking so that they could go pursue something bigger. The implication of the iron triangle is that improvement is not possible. We're actually performing as well as we can. It's all optimizing within that triangle. It's all about making trade-offs at this point because we can't actually get better. We can only make different choices, right? So we got to nuke that as well in order to be able to unlock our ability to improve and break through this current frontier. Now, you might be thinking, Erik, why are you talking about factories? This is a talk about software. Sorry, the context matters because this background of mine helped me realize that as my company, which is a quality assurance testing company that uses machine learning, broke into market in 2018, I was running against the same mindsets. I was running up against the same implicit belief, and it's not in software testing journals and blogs, but it's still out there, that you have these fundamental trade-offs that you have to make between code quality, your budget, and your time to market, right? You want better code quality, you got to take more time and spend more money, etc. And how do we know this is true, right? Well, Mark Zuckerberg famously said, move fast and break things, right? And because Facebook said it, everyone got really excited about it, right? But what does it mean? It means that we're going to pick speed, time to market, and sacrifice quality. So if we go back to this triangle, right, what is Mark Zuckerberg saying? He's saying, okay, well, we're stuck in this triangle. We're not going to move fast and not break things. We're going to move fast and break things because we have to make a trade-off choice. So we're going to prioritize time to market over code quality. That's what we're going to do. let's nuke that as well because it's BS, right? And Mark Zuckerberg even had to walk this back at some point because it turns out move fast and break things is not a good way of operating. And so there are, as you think about this iron triangle concept in software engineering, you might be familiar with some strategic choices that your team has probably had to make at different times, right? So we need better quality. Let's hire more automation engineers. What's that going to do? It's going to increase time to market. So it's going to slow things down because you got more tests, and it's going to cost more, right? So we're moving towards quality and making trade-offs. Or we need to move faster, right? So what are we going to do? We're going to test less often because testing takes a lot of time, right? And we're going to let some stuff get into prod, and we're going to fix bugs in prod, right? That happens sometimes. Sometimes there are certain applications where that's not a big deal. So we get to make that trade-off. Or we need to save money because, I don't know, a pandemic hit. Guess who's first against the wall? It's always QA, right? Always QA is first against the wall. So when we need to save money, we say we're just going to have less code quality and just accept that, right? These are all trade-offs that implicitly accept the iron triangle of software development as immutable, right? As an unchallengeable fact of life. And it even gets baked into different ways, different modes of deployment, right? So one is the Agile approach. So we're deploying every 2 weeks or so. We do a huge batch of testing at the end with a big QA team, right? So we've written lots of end-to-end tests. At the end of 2 weeks, we're going to run them all. They might take hours. They might take days. And there's this long repair cycle because a bunch of the tests break, and we don't know which ones, we then have to investigate them because they're flaky and we made some UI changes. So we don't know which ones really caught bugs. And if we did catch a bug, that bug was probably written 2 weeks ago or a week ago. And so it's going to take a long time to hunt it down and fix it, right? So we're sacrificing time, we're spending a lot of money, but fewer bugs hit prod, right? It's pretty good for quality. So we're squarely up here on the triangle. But then there are a lot of teams that are moving from Agile to continuous deployment, which is great, right? We're deploying constantly. Every time we have a PR, right to prod. We can only support minimal testing with that, right? Because you can't have a 6-hour test. You can't have a 2-day test for continuous deployment. So we're often doing just lower level testing, unit testing. And so code is going to production. It's being seen by users without end-to-end testing being run. Often there's not a QA team at all. So we're saving a lot of money, right? So our budget is more focused on development. So we're able to crank out code faster. And we repair stuff on the fly when it's in prod, right? So we're often making up for this using something like Launch Darkly and some good APM in order to minimize the impact on prod. Like Amazon does this, Google does this. They're getting rid of end-to-end testing. And they're just saying, we're going to deploy to a small number of users, a canary build. We're going to use good APM to see if we broke anything. And if we did, we're going to roll it back, right? And when I talk to these folks, they say, well, we have a great software team, so it's fine. And it's fine, of course, till it's not fine, because you do get those critical bugs that hit prod, because you're not doing end-to-end testing. You're doing a minimum amount of testing before you deploy. And so these two approaches are fundamentally trade-offs, right, that accept that you have to choose. So how do we end this? Well, the answer, of course, is let's use data. Right. So this is a Pareto graph, and the Pareto principle is an observation. It's like a law. It's observed that you get 80% of the results with 20% of the effort. Pareto, Mr. Pareto first came up with or Signore Pareto first came up with this in the 1600s, noticing that 80% of his, I believe, peas came from 20% of his pea plants, and then he started noticing this everywhere. And so we can use this data to identify what's the 80% of effort that we want to put into testing that requires 80% of the results that we want to get out of testing that requires 20% of the effort, 20% of the cost, 20% of the time, right? And if we can do that, we're actually doing fundamentally better than if we were just making trade-offs between having lots of tests and not lots of tests. And so the way that we can prioritize what tests we write with data, the benefits, of prioritizing with data are we're going to catch the bugs that matter, right? Because data is going to tell us what's important to test. And we'll talk about how we do that in a second. So we get better quality. We have fewer tests to run in the test suite because we're not running a lot of tests that provide low or no value, right? Because the sort of like shotgun, write as many tests as you can approach, just produces a lot of tests that you don't need. So we can deploy much faster. It's much, with a shorter test suite runtime, we can test more often and have shorter repair cycles, right? So we can catch bugs closer to when they're written, shift left. We are spending less money on maintaining these tests, right? So our team can look at more forward, they can look more forward, or we just have to hire less of a team. And a way of setting this up by having this like highly prioritized test suite is you can even break that test suite up a bunch of different ways depending on the data. Again, we'll get into detail in a minute, but like in a like kind of standard deployment, what we might see is that continuously, like our feature branches we're promoting to dev, and we're running small tests. So often just unit tests or lower level tests, or even a very small end-to-end test suite. And then when we're merging to master, or before we're shipping code to our users, we're going to run a bigger test suite, but it doesn't have to be huge. And the challenge, of course, with this is how do we get that data, right? And I think a lot of teams think that they're making like very informed, logical, data-driven, or at least fact-driven choices about what tests they're going to write in their test suite. So again, there's no room for opportunity because we're already doing as well as we can, or there's no room to improve. We're already doing as well as we can. But of course, one thing I realize is true, and sort of like as I'm in addition to being a CRO, I'm on a lot of sales calls with enterprise folks, and one thing I often ask people is, hey, if you just like dumped your QA team and dumped all of your tests, and then brought on an entirely different QA team with a different QA leader, would they write the exact same tests that you have now, or might they be different? And people are like, well, it'd probably be different. It's like, cool. So there's just this like human factor in what tests get written, right? Which means that data isn't telling us what to test. Humans are telling us what to test. And humans can only understand an application so well, especially the bigger it gets. They're fallible, right? And those humans are making these choices based on all the feature specs they see about, well, how are users going to use these features? They're making some assumptions about that. And what's really high priority? They're making some assumptions about that. None of it is really data driven. And so you run a bunch of tests that are just doing things that users aren't even doing, thinking that it's making you safe, when in fact your users are running off doing this other thing or really care about this other thing. And you're not testing it at all, right? And that's why they get cranky when bugs hit prod. Even though you're investing a lot of money in QA, you still send bugs to prod that users are cranky about. It's because you don't have data telling you what to test. You don't have data telling you what your users care about. But there's good news. Our users are constantly telling us what they care about, right? They're using the application, right? We're getting all these signals from them. We're getting API calls from them. We're getting, if you have any product analytics, like it can be as simple as, Google Analytics. Your users are telling you how they're using the application. They're telling you what the priorities are. And so we can just collect the data and analyze it. Now, of course, that happens to be very difficult, which is why we built a product around it, right? Because you can't just look at Google Analytics and like really know what's going on because there's so much variation in how users use stuff. So many micro variations in how they'll use a feature set. You have to do all sorts of like tagging configuration in order to really understand this. And that requires, human inference as well. So I know some teams that do this fairly well, but it's still hard. It's time consuming and it's fundamentally, you're fundamentally going to be inaccurate with it. But that attitude, that mindset of we're going to use data to tell us, we're going to use our users' behavior and their priorities to tell us what's important to them to be able to do in our application and write end-to-end tests from that, that's how you start to break out of the iron triangle. Because, of course, remember I mentioned that Pareto graph? Well, users all have, if you were to look at different kind of behavior patterns or paths across your application, there's a small amount of stuff users do constantly, and there's a lot of corners of the application that they barely use, right? And there are other ways to slice and dice that, and we'll talk about it in a sec. But our users, if we can analyze that data properly and get general patterns of how users are using an application, we can understand what the high priorities are for them, we can test them, and we can get high quality with high speed and low cost, right? And we can break through the iron triangle and break through these trade-offs that we have to make. And what thinking about this means, what thinking this way means, is that we have a fundamentally different way of calculating end-to-end test coverage, right? I often ask people, what is your what's your end-to-end test coverage right now? They'll be like 50%. And I say, 50% of what? And they stare at me. They're like, well, 50% of all the tests. It's like every single possible test that you could possibly write on this application, you've written half of them, right? Because every single possible test is every single possible permutation of behavior on the application. There are, you get into Salesforce, there are billions of different paths that you could in theory take. And they said, no, it's 50% of the likely stuff. It's like, oh, how do you know these are the likely ways that users use the application? Well, it's based on the specs. It's based on features. Okay, that's not how they actually use it, right? UX teams know this. User experience teams don't assume how users are going to use the application. They know that their assumptions are wrong. That hasn't translated over to engineering. But product teams know it. Engineering teams should know it. But they often pretend that they understand how users are going to use their application. And therefore, they know exactly the full set of tests that they could or should be writing. And our coverage level is some percentage that are done, right? But that's crazy. It's meaningless, right? So if one company tells me they have 70% test coverage, another company tells me they have 20, I don't know who's doing better. Because the denominator, the end-to-end tests that they came up with in their room, right, in an Excel sheet is completely arbitrary. So 70% is not better than 20%. More tests is not necessarily better. Right? It's a complete vanity metric, but it's all that we had for 20 years, right? That's why we rely on it. It's not that we're all stupid, right? It's not that the entire QA industry are a bunch of fools. It's that we never had the data, right? The software industry, the dev tools industry and the testing industry has underserved this market for decades by not helping teams know what to test, right? Software testing companies and software testing tool sets are so obsessed with how to write the tests that they've never thought about helping teams understand what tests to write. And that's the thing that we need to change if we're going to break through these trade-offs. And so that's the old and busted way of doing it. The new hotness is using a denominator of all observed user interactions, right? So when I said all those permutations of everything that anyone could do on an application, we're looking at everything does on an application, everything they do. We know it, right? We can collect that data and we can analyze it, right? And again, I'll talk a little bit about that, about how our product does it in just a second here. But we know 100% of it. And so 100% is if we tested every permutation of everything that everyone actually does, that would be 100% test coverage. We would know that every behavior, no matter what, that users have gone through in the past is tested. And therefore, there's absolutely no chance that we could break something that matters to them. Cool, right? Now, 100% is a bit insane, right? We have the option to make some trade-offs here, but they're informed trade-offs, and we can use that Pareto principle, right? So what do? We shoot for, depending on the application, depending on the customer, depending on some of the trade-offs that they do want to make, we shoot for 60, 65, 80% coverage. Where we say, if we look back at this Pareto, and we look at the first, if we take the area under this curve and say, we're going to look at the first 2/3 of it, or we're going to test the first 2/3 of it, and then this long tail that represents 1/3 of behavior of things people do. We're not going to test it in this small, tight end-to-end test suite that can run continuously. Then great. If we want to get to 80%, it's out here. It's a bigger test suite, but it's way smaller than the test suite that one would build if one was just trying to be expansive using a set of test cases that were come up with in a room on an Excel sheet. So we have a smaller test suite that is more focused, that we know is testing what matters to users. So it's cheaper to build, it runs faster, and it gets better test coverage, right? It assures better quality. We improve all three parts of this triangle at once, and the triangle is suddenly not so iron anymore. So here's how ProdPerfect does that. I have one more thing first. Sorry. So there are other ways to slice and dice this, right? I think those of you who have been in the industry for a long time might be thinking, hey, usage frequency is great, but I have like users that are very important to me, but not very common. So I have free usage and premium usage. I want to test premium usage. Great. Let's identify the user, split the analysis, and test for premium users, right? Or I've got areas of the application that are used rarely that I know are really important. So account management, right? Like managing my own account, changing my password, updating payments, all that stuff's got to work, and it shouldn't be used all that often, right? So if it's an e-commerce site, I'm buying things all the time. I'm not changing my credit card all the time, but we still need to test it. So we can look at URL clusters that define certain feature sets and say, hey, we know that these are important, that they're mission critical, that they work. So let's cluster those and analyze them separately. So there's all sorts of ways that we can make this analysis more sophisticated than just looking at all behavior and testing what's most common. But that fundamental principle of let's understand what our users are doing, understand what's important to them, and test that rather than test what we think is important is how we break through the iron triangle. And there are a lot of different ways depending on the application, depending on the team, that we can muck with that. So real quick, the way ProdPerfect does this is we collect clickstream metadata, right? So just like Google Analytics, we see an event, right? And we see a bunch of stuff about that event that tells us what's going on with that event so that we can auto track it, right? And know that people are doing the same thing all the time. And we build a big old map of it, right? So we know events that happen frequently and infrequently. And this is like the tiniest, simplest map that I can find from our customers. There are these like really big, gnarly ones that look horrifying, but that's the great thing about data science is it doesn't care how big it is, right? You and me trying to look at this and understand what really matters to our users, hopeless, right? This is something that data science should do. This isn't something that humans should just sit there and blink away at. Total waste of time. So we build this map of an application, and then the machine learning analysis engine takes over and it starts tracing through what people are doing frequently. It normalizes different attributes about, different disparate data in order to understand like generic events, right? So if someone's buying a product, like we don't care which product it is for end-to-end testing. We just know it's a product, at least not on prod, right? In the test environment, we care. But on prod, we don't care which product it is. We just want to know it's a product. If we're using Salesforce, we don't care which account you're looking at, which opportunity, which contact you're looking at, just that you're looking at an account and interacting with it. So we normalize that, and then we aggregate these like variations in behavior, right? So people aren't going to go through the application the exact same way every time. They'll get lost a little bit. They'll get distracted. They'll hit the privacy page by mistake. They'll hit back and hit forward, right? So how do we really know that that a single behavior or workflow is the right one? What we just do is we statistically aggregate this very self-similar behavior into a core workflow and say, what's the representative workflow that best captures this? What people are really trying to do. And so we do that a bunch, and then we have, a whole bunch. So these green lines are like, what we've identified that we need to test. These are test cases, just in cool matrix format. And so we've identified, hey, this is the stuff that's really important. And then look at all these like wacky, edgy ways that people use the behavior that shouldn't be tested, right? And look at all the unnecessary tests that we're not building. It's cool. And so what we can do is we can build this Pareto. So here's a test suite in progress. We're building this Pareto. Here's like the incremental coverage as a percent of total user behavior represented of each test. And then here's the cumulative coverage of these tests. And you notice this first one, you probably can't see this 30 here. This first test represents 30% of all user behavior on an application. It's an e-commerce site. What are people doing? They're buying a thing, right? So that's not a huge insight on its own, other than it's quite big. It's the stuff that's a little less common that gets really interesting, where we go like, oh, that's how users use it. It's important to them. Let's test that. And what's also interesting always as we get engaged with the customer is what's not on there, right? What's missing? Because customers are like, wait a minute, like a director of engineering, again, who's not a head of product or a head of QA is going, wait a minute, I thought that people really cared about this thing. And it turns out they don't, right? So we're not going to worry as much about testing that as the stuff that people do care about. And so it's through the use of data and through prioritizing with that data that we can break through this iron triangle and build a test suite and have a testing regime that is fast, cheap, highly effective at assuring quality. And it opens up all sorts of options for you to use your resources differently, for you to change your entire SDLC, for you to accelerate product to market, not spend as much time fixing bugs, not spend as much time on repair or hunting stuff down. And fundamentally, right, much more than, hey, we're spending a little less on QA, gain a fundamental advantage in the marketplace, right, by being able to deploy better product faster with less money than your competition, that's going to be a game changer. So, whether or not you work with us, I hope that this talk has been really helpful, and I hope that you will, feel free to ask me questions. I actually didn't put my bloody email address on this thing, but hopefully it's in the. I'll make sure it gets in the talk notes. But if you've got questions or different ways that you want to think about using data to improve how you test, I always love chatting about this stuff. That's why I started a company about it. And, if anyone has questions that you want to ask me now, we've got another, I blitzed through this. We've got another up to 35 minutes together. And I've actually got, oh, no, that was Tom's hello. And so if anyone's got questions, you can use the chat functionality. Maybe Tom, if you want to help anyone that wants to use it. But you can use the chat functionality to ask me questions, and I'll answer them live. Oh, I can put my email address in this here. So if you want to learn more about us, especially we put a lot of time. I put a lot of time into thought leadership stuff. So if you want more of my wacky ideas about how to think about QA, I'm going to link you to our blog. And if you want to reach out to me personally, pretty easy. It's Erik@ProdPerfect.com. And again, happy to just chat. I'm too busy to hustle you for sales these days. So if you're not interested in buying, I will just answer your question and see what you think. And if you are interested in talking to us about working together, I'll have a quick chat with you and then forward you on to our onboarding engineering team about what that looks like. Oh, thank you. So I got a great talk. Thank you in the chat. Appreciate it.
So I had a question, Erik. How do you think people got into this iron triangle mindset, and what prevents them from getting out of it?
That is a great question. I'm glad you asked. Thank you. So let's go back to, where are we? Can I click that directly? All right, there we go. So what got people into the iron triangle? I think originally the iron triangle was not called the iron triangle originally. It was called the project management triangle. And I think a big part of it, there's two angles to it. One of them is actually useful project management theory. And then one of them is just kind of human nature. So regarding project management theory, the project management triangle, again, does represent real trade-offs that you can make. And I might have blanked out. Okay, I'm back. So no matter how good something is, once you've reached that certain level of improvement, once you've reached that certain level of performance and excellence, you are then making trade-offs. And strategy is about trade-offs. Strategy is about choosing what you don't focus on. This is true in go-to-market strategy, right? We're not going to focus on, Europe and North Africa, right? We're going to focus on North America. So we've chosen one thing over another. It's true in operations strategy, right? Operationally, we're going to focus on our customer acquisition cost and our margin over hypergrowth, right? That's a choice we can make, and so there is a fundamental difference between those choices and improvement. Improvement's always possible, right? And you can always make the strategic choice to invest more in driving that improvement versus investing in making better trade-offs. But at some point, you are going to end up, no matter how big you've made that triangle, you are going to end up somewhere in that triangle. And so it's useful project management theory and strategy theory. So the human nature part, I think that started coming into play here is that I think unfortunately in older, and I'll talk about how it got into heavy industry first because it's my background. In heavy industry, especially in publicly traded heavy industry, you've got quarterly results that you need to hit. You've got a lot of pressure from investors that don't really understand what's going on. And so expectation management is very important, right? Managing their expectations about what's possible is very important because one of the kind of perverted incentives in almost any company, but particularly publicly traded ones, is if you even like make a squeak that improvement is possible, instantly it's expected, right? It's like, oh, you could be doing better. Why aren't you doing better already? And frankly, that situation just stinks if you're a director or a VP. It's unpleasant, and you can't win because you're always like, you getting your bonus for the year or you getting your promotion is always based on performance against some sort of target or benchmark. And so the perverted incentive that happens if you go, hey, look at all this opportunity that we can improve in, right? We've identified all this ability to get better. All of a sudden, your target for hitting, if we're getting your bonus for the year or keeping your bloody job, has just gone up. Well, you don't want that. You don't want to talk about it because it's literally hurts your wallet. So what do people do in these publicly traded heavy industry companies? They sandbag, right? They say, well, only 3% improvement is possible. And they make sure that they hit that 3% improvement and don't go any further in that year. Why? Because they want some stuff in their, if they know they can get to 4 or 5, they want some stuff in their back pocket for next year. Because if you hit 3% this year, the investors are going to want you to hit 3% again next year. So if you exhaust as much as you can this year, you've made your life harder next year. And guess what? Your bonus isn't even bigger this year. It's crazy. And so if you think about these incentives that leaders go through in these publicly traded companies, they're incented to tone down expectations and make clear that only so much improvement is possible and no more. So it just stinks. And so it meant when people saw this project management triangle, they're like, yes, I can use this to manage expectations, right? So the investors come and they say, I want this to be cheaper, right? Instead of saying like, I need to make it cheaper, you say, okay, great. You want it to be cheaper, so we're going to spend less money. Do you want it to be slower or do you want it to be lower quality? Which one do you want to do? And you put the monkey back on their back, right? And they're like, oh gosh, I just want it to be cheaper. I don't want it to be lower quality or slower. So, if it needs to be a little more expensive over time, over budget, fine, ship it. And so it embracing that brings some breathing room for a project manager or a director. And so you get this kind of vicious cycle happening where there are reasons to reinforce this thinking because the company's incentive to improve as much as possible is not the same as the incentive for leadership that's answering to investors. And we see some of the same in software as well. A little less true with startups. The incentives are perverted in a different way. With startups, it's like promise the moon and then apologize later when you don't get it, which is its own really bad, uncomfortable thing that it's hard to avoid, and we try to avoid as much as possible. Obviously, in publicly traded software companies, you have the same thing, right? So you have people asking, why haven't you released the feature that allows you to go after this new vertical yet, right? Well, look, we could do it faster, but it's going to cost more. And then the investor's like, oh, no, it's okay. And so I think even though you don't have the same, you have a different flavor of project management thinking in kind of the new way of doing software. The old way of doing software was the waterfall way. It was the same project managers that were building factories just came over into software and were like, this is how you do it, right? And you had this big waterfall thing and you built it from the ground up once. So old waterfall software development was it looked exactly the same as my old heavy industry work. But even though we've pivoted to more agile, because the market expects it, right? The market has demonstrated that it's possible, so the market expects it now. It's competitively impossible to not be a little bit more agile. There is still this incentive for directors and directors of engineering and other software leaders to minimize the pressure on them personally to perform and improve constantly. And so I think that's how that same incentive scheme is how it infected the software industry. And we don't see as much. Again, I think like there's this brand new wave. The better part of Silicon Valley doesn't think like this. But again, the perverse incentive is to like do the opposite. Be like, yeah, we're just going to improve everything by 10,000% by tomorrow. And and it means that the good part of that kind of attitude is it means that the people on the front lines who like have their hands in the code do have the ability to like think big and get crazy and take some risks and try to break through, rather than be so caught up with hitting a very fine razor blade of expectation management. So that was a bit of a mouthful, but I think that's where it came from.
Yeah. So what knowing that people have a hard time accepting new things, what strategies have you found that get people to start thinking outside of the iron triangle?
Great question. Thank you. So there's a couple. Some of them are less fun than others. So part of what would happen when I was a factory consultant is the top brass, after C-suite, after they believed that we could do something, they would say, okay, just go run your analysis and show us what's possible. And then once it's exposed, there's no more hiding, right? The director can't hide anymore. Unfortunately, that was a little bit, it created some antagonism, right? From the people that we were trying to help and had to work with. Because they were like, they'd look at something and be like, right? Like, what do you mean we can cut our costs in half in theory, right? In theory, right? And of course it's years of work. And so we had to like manage that, we even had to manage expectations that like, look, just because the opportunity is there, it doesn't mean you can snap your fingers and get it. But so some of it is you just have to rip the Band-Aid off and expose it all. No more hiding, no more sandbagging, right? We just have this block of opportunity in front of us and we're going to choose what we go after. And I think that requires special training and a lot of talent, right? Like we were very expensive consultants for this reason. Not a lot of people can do that well. But to like slow roll a cultural change a little bit more in your organization, it's really, as much as like the thing that embeds this is incentives, the thing that breaks through is incentives, right? The thing that shatters it is incentives. If you, oh my gosh, I forget his first name, but Talib's book, Skin in the Game. He's the guy that wrote Black Swan. He wrote this book called Skin in the Game, which I absolutely love because I think it's a great treatise on human nature. And Skin in the Game says that one of the lessons of Skin in the Game is don't trust anyone that doesn't have skin in the game to give you advice about something. So like if someone is going to say, oh, you should invest in this stock, it's like you need to ask, like, have you invested recently in this stock? Because if not, what you have to say about the stock is irrelevant. And he's able to show that through a bunch of data and studies and experiments that he ran, that people are better at predicting the future when they have skin in the game, about their prediction being right. So similarly, what we want to do is get our leaders' skin in the game to just keep reaching for the heavens. And so there's a couple ways to do that. One of them is don't give them arbitrary improvement targets, right? If you give them totally arbitrary improvement targets, they will sandbag. Because you're like, okay, you said 3% this year. I have no say in this. So I'm just going to do the 3% and like just hope you don't make it 5% next year, because that's going to make my life hard. And so instead of doing that, what you can do for your director of engineering or et cetera, is offer like kind of a bounty system, right? The more you do, the more improvement you drive, the more money you and your team make, the bigger your team's bonuses every year, right? And you're not going to get fired if you have a bum year because you totally kicked butt last year and you haven't figured out where to get the next thing this year. Of course, the company's incentive is to get as much improvement as early as possible, right? So as a C-suite leader, if there are any here, you have to have the spine to look at your investors and say, this is the way we're going to do it. It's different from what you used to, but it gets better results. So like either like sign on or sign out, because this is how I'm running this company. And if you don't like it, go invest in something else. Sell now, go invest. So go invest elsewhere. And then once you've gotten them off your back, you have the right to say, the more you do, the more you make, right? How far you go in this company is absolutely up to you. And that means that someone is going to go start to look for all that opportunity because that opportunity being exposed helps them, right? They're not getting punished for there being a lot of opportunity. They're being rewarded for finding it and realizing it. And that means that, people are going to be like genuinely excited about it. It's more of a game. They make a lot of money doing it. And if you can, start that, people are going to be hesitant at first, but if you can celebrate those wins and reinforce your commitment to always rewarding upside, you're going to get people acting that way much more. And, it's insufficient. I think I like John Cotter's Leading Change. It was also originally an HBS article, but became a book. Leading change is, to really change a culture, especially in a very well-established culture, is extraordinarily difficult and requires a lot of attention and love. You can't just drop an email or a Slack message or have a company kick off and expect it to happen. If you want this, in all sorts of stuff, not just testing, not just software development, but every part of your organization, you just happen to be at Agile DevOps. But if you want your team to start racing towards more opportunity and breaking out of this mindset that, what's out there is limited, what's out there is fairly fixed, and then you need to reward it consistently. And you need to put a lot of work into that. So, but the rewards for you and your business are profound.
So can you help me understand what this looks like for like a typical company that is selling things, services on a website or something, or maybe a quick case study from one of your customers?
Yeah, great question. Sorry, I keep saying that, but I really like your questions. So, I think a lot of our case studies, our case studies are, of course, very self-serving, right? They're designed to get you to want to buy ProdPerfect. But let's talk through a real life example where we actually have the right to talk about it, and then I'm going to talk about one where I can't name the company, but it's still really cool. So, we work with a lot of SaaS, e-commerce, kind of like consumer applications, insurers, banks, and typically when someone comes to us, when someone's talking to us, they know that they have a challenge. One of the things that makes our lives really easy is that unlike all this like consulting, management mumbo jumbo that I just gave you, like we don't need to get people to really change all that much. Because I think people have like bought in enough that, machine learning is the future. And people will come to us, they'll say like, I just searched for like machine learning and testing because I figure it's going to be better. And now I want to talk to you. Right? And that's like all they know. And so there's already this belief that breakthrough technology is a way to break out of the iron triangle. And it kind of makes sense, right? Like, when we introduced the combustion engine to farming, nobody said, wow, I don't know if we're going to be able to farm more this year. Everyone's like, cool, tractors, right? Let's do it. And so breakthrough technology is like a good excuse or it's like an easy in to this because you don't have to ask people to be different. You just have to ask them to adopt it. And who doesn't want to just like cut a check and get better testing that runs faster and more reliably than if they had to hire a bunch of people themselves, right? It's just like, oh, I spend less money and don't have to do any work and get a better result. Dude, I'm in. And so sometimes our case studies aren't necessarily good examples of fundamental changes in thinking, but they can drive them. They can drive them because here's a good example. It was a company called the Mom Project, and I love this company because I love their mission so much. What a big part of what they're doing is helping women first become employed, but then to have upward career trajectories when conventionally one of the things that has been so hard for the industry, especially the tech industry, to deal with is the fact that women need to go on maternity leave if they're going to have kids. And that's why it's the mom project, not just the woman project. And so these guys are fundamentally, they're a couple things. They're a two-sided marketplace among a few other things. But this two-sided marketplace, job seekers and employers. And what they were dealing with was a great deal of tech debt. And they were trying to go clean that up. And of course, tech debt, the tech debt can be this death spiral because you're making all these changes to fix the tech debt and then you break something else, right? And where we really shine, of course, is regression testing. So everyone who's been in testing knows what regressions are, but those who don't, it's when you have current functionality and you mess with it and it breaks, right? Rather than something new coming up broken, it's something that currently exists breaking. And so they were introducing all these regressions, and they had a testing team, but that testing team, the problem that they had was they just didn't have a fat pile of money. They were, this was not, they fundraised before the crazy heyday of 2018, 2019, where people just had buku bucks to throw around at everything. So they were forced to be a little bit lean. So they, again, specifically because the industry has underserved the market, they made a choice in this triangle to prioritize budget and time to market over code quality, right? And they knew they made that choice. And it was a mature choice to make at the time because, especially with the two-sided marketplace, scaling to market is really important. Because you have to get a bunch of, you have this kind of chicken and egg problem with two-sided marketplaces where one side of the marketplace doesn't want to show up to the other side of the marketplace is already there. So you got to get them both at the same time, right? And you just got to during that phase of their growth, they had to focus on that. So I think they even made the right choice. But they knew that they wanted to mature out of that, but they just didn't have a ton of cash. And so the iron triangle that was implied for them before they met us was, if we're going to improve code quality, we need to spend a lot more money and or slow down our time to market. Both of these are strategic threats for us getting to our next fundraising round. So we can't do it. And often, usually when someone's working with us, it's because they've hit a wall or they see they're about to hit a wall. When they go well, I can't accept this. I cannot accept that I have to make a choice between quality, budget, and time to market because I don't have enough of all of those to spare. It is strategically risky for me to sacrifice one or more of these. And so what ended up happening with the Mom project is by working with us, they just had 2 QA automation engineers, and they just weren't building enough. But by working with us, what we were able to do was deploy this data-driven end-to-end test suite, and just handle it for them, which is great. And they were able to then deploy their 2 QA automation engineers to essentially new feature testing, and which they had never done before because they were so focused on regressions. And because we actually deployed a smaller test suite than they had. So what that meant was that when they were making these changes to fix their tech debt, what happened was if they introduced regressions, they knew about it right away because our test suite ran in 8 minutes, full end-to-end test suite that ran in 8 minutes. And so what it meant was that a developer developed this habit of deploy, grab a cup of coffee, come back and see if ProdPerfect's mission control told them anything was broken. And if no, great. If yes, I just deployed it. I know what I just wrote, maybe 50 lines of code, right? And I'm going to fix it right now within a few minutes. And so what happened for them was they were able to adopt this virtuous cycle, right? All these things got better. They shipped fewer bugs to prod. They fixed the bugs they introduced in test much faster. They had put aside budget from our QA automation engineers because they were feeling desperate, but they were able to free up that budget to then be able to go think about future deployment. And Matt McNamara, their VP engineering, he had this mindset change. And what he ended up doing was bringing that mindset change to feature development. And so they didn't have like a separate head of product for a while. So he was kind of head of engineering and product, which is like the startup life, right? And he ended up being able to use better product analytics, not even ours, because ours aren't good product analytics, right? We don't build that product. And I forget which product analytics tool set he used, but what he was able to do was understand what features are people using most, right? What is the kind of stuff that people really need? Where are people getting stuck? Where are people spending a lot of time? And he was able to prioritize his product development based on that. And again, that data-driven prioritization that he had taken from the mindset of QA over into product allowed him to then move on to build not just more product, right? Not just ship more, not just toss features at the wall, not think that like story points in a Scrum are how you measure success, because they're not, right? You build the wrong stuff, it doesn't matter. But knowing that he was building the right stuff changed his entire definition of success for engineering, or for his product and engineering team, to what he called user points, right? And user points were, what does the data tell us about how much this is going to impact our users' experience, right? And we have these two sides, so they both get their own user points. And how many user points did we ship this week, right? And it may have been a very small thing that had a lot of user points. Why? Because users really cared about it, right? Or they were having a really hard time. And so we can see how this or like breaking out of this iron triangle and using a data-driven mindset of what really matters here. It's not number of tests, it's not number of points, it's not number of features, it's not number of anything, right? It's not how much code you cranked out, it's not lines of code. None of that matters, right? Users don't pay us for lines of code. Users don't pay us for lines of code, right? Users pay us for an experience. Users pay us to be able to do something that adds value to their lives. So we need to stop, so he did this, and all of us need to stop obsessing over like more, right? Because it's just this like tremendous money pit that often just makes our users' experience even worse, right? Which is horrifying to think about, but it's true. And I think that's the best case study I have of where working with us provoked mindset change that ended up really allowing Matt and his team to thrive. And they went and they raised the next round and we all had beer together. It was a great time, right? And I think that the potential knock-on effects of bringing better data into making choices about what lines of code are we going to write and what aren't we going to write is again major competitive advantage. Whether it's test code or product code, right, is a major competitive advantage. And especially right now, frankly, it can be the difference between survival and death. There's not as much money out there as there used to be. If you're in the startup world, like you don't have the luxury of effing around. And so I think this becomes imperative.
Great. Thank you. I don't see any other questions. So if you have any parting words, or we can end the session.
Cool. Parting words. Yeah, my parting words are I will sum up a little bit. I will sum up breaking the iron triangle in a word, right? Define what really matters and measure it. And use that to guide what you do. And you'll be able to improve your, code quality can be replaced with value to customer or something like that, right? Improve that with less budget, faster time to market. And that's what leaders are here to do. And I think it's ultimately a responsibility for all of us to challenge ourselves to think with greater rigor about these two things: what matters and how do I measure it? Which again is like very basic. It's fundamentals, right? And nothing I'm like the most fundamental part of what I'm telling you isn't new. Everything that we ever need to learn in life is something that we really need to learn in life. We usually need to look at it a few different ways. And so the iron triangle is a specific lens to look through this kind of thinking. Doing it in testing is supremely valuable, right? And one of the nice things about ProdPerfect being the market is you don't even have to like radically upend your entire process to adopt it. But once you see the value of it, it is time to radically upend your entire process because it's irresponsible not to. And so again, the fundamentals are not new. But hopefully, what I hope everyone took out of this is that, this new different lens of looking at these fundamentals, these two things that you need to get right, was valuable, gives you something to think about, hopefully gives you hopefully someone wrote down oh, I should go look at this, right? And if one person did that, then this has been a great use of time. Once again, if you want to learn more about how I and my CEO, Dan, think about testing, it's weird, it's radical. Not everyone agrees with it, but that's, I think, what makes it interesting, because you probably read all the blog mill stuff about testing already, and why keep doing that? So you can go to prodperfect.com/blog and just see what we're writing about right now. We've got a few things coming up about engineering culture over the next few months that I think are really interesting. And if you want to talk to me about any of this stuff, it's Erik, E-R-I-K, at prodperfect.com. So PRODPERFECT.com. And I'd love to chat. So everyone who attended, thank you so much. Tom, this was, Agile DevOps is always always a ball. I'm sad we couldn't do it in person this time, but the whole virtual event has been a smashing success. I'm really impressed. Thanks for all the help. Thanks for inviting me here, and thanks for the opportunity.
Great. Thank you, Erik. And that'll conclude the webcast.
Stay safe, everyone.